Near Soledad, California, at a spot where the Salinas River forms a tranquil pool, abundant willows line the river, and wildlife, including rabbits and lizards, live here. A beaten path, an ash pile, and a sycamore limb, worn smooth by men who have sat on it, show that people often visit this pool. Two men walk down the path to the pool. One of the men is small, with restless eyes and sharp, strong features. The other man is huge and shapeless of face. The larger man has sloping shoulders, drags his feet slightly, and lets his arms hang loosely by his sides. The huge man, Lenny, gulps down water from the pool like a thirsty horse. The small man, George, drinks water from his cupped hand. He sits by the pool, embracing his drawn-up knees. Lenny imitates him exactly. Lenny has forgotten where they are going, and George, frustrated by his companion's poor memory, reminds him they are going to a ranch to get work. George then accuses Lenny of hiding something in his hand, an accusation that Lenny at first denies. Lenny then contritely admits his secret, opening his hand to reveal a dead mouse, which he has been keeping in his pocket and petting. When George orders him to give it up, Lenny hands it to George, who throws it away. George tells Lenny not to say anything when they talk to the boss at the ranch, and to let him do the talking. Lenny tries to remember, repeating, "I ain't gonna say nothin'." George also tells Lenny that at their new job, Lenny must avoid any behavior of the sort he exhibited at their previous job, which was near the town of Weed. George decides they're going to camp by the pool and head to the ranch in the morning, and he sends Lenny off to gather wood for a campfire. When Lenny returns, George knows that he has retrieved the dead mouse. He demands that Lenny hand it over again, and George then throws the mouse as far as he can into the brush. George explains that he doesn't want Lenny to pet the dead mouse because it isn't fresh. Lenny reminds George how Lenny's Aunt Clara used to give him live mice to pet, and how she stopped because Lenny always accidentally killed them. They get a campfire burning and warm up cans of beans. George complains about all the things he could do if he wasn't tied down taking care of Lenny. "I could eat any place I want, hotel or any place," he says. Lenny feels guilty and offers to go off into the hills and live in a cave. George feels bad about his complaints and tells Lenny he doesn't want him to leave. Lenny then asks George to tell about the rabbits, and even though George has told this story many times before, he talks again about the farm he and Lenny dream of having. Lenny listens intently. George says they have a future because they have each other. Eventually, they are going to get a place of their own with a garden and rabbits in cages. They start to eat their beans. George tells Lenny that if he gets into trouble at the ranch, to come to this pool and hide. Lenny says he'll remember. The bunkhouse at the ranch contains 8 bunks, with an apple box above each bunk to hold the workers' paraphernalia. There are a cast-iron stove and a large table in the center of the room. An old worker named Candy, accompanied by his ancient sheepdog, leads George and Lenny into the room. Candy is missing his right hand. The boss arrives and asks George's and Lenny's names. The boss wonders why Lenny doesn't talk. George explains that his friend isn't smart, but that he's a good worker, strong as a bull. Lenny repeats, "Strong as a bull." The boss suspects George is taking advantage of Lenny by stealing some of his pay. George vehemently denies it. Still suspicious, the boss leaves. George reprimands Lenny for talking to the boss and then catches Candy listening at the door. Candy denies eavesdropping. The boss's son, a short, pugnacious young man named Curly, enters and asks where his father is. He then tries to talk to Lenny, who doesn't respond. George answers for Lenny, which annoys Curly. After Curly leaves, George wonders why he has a chip on his shoulder. Candy says that Curly is a skilled, lightweight boxer who likes to pick fights with bigger guys. He then discloses that Curly is married to an attractive, flirtatious woman, a tart, and adds that Curly wears a glove in his left hand filled with Vaseline to keep his hand soft for his wife. George is disgusted. Candy leaves and George warns Lenny about Curly. "He was kind of feeling you out. He's going to take a sock at you the first chance he gets." Lenny says he doesn't want any trouble. George reminds him to hide by the pool if he gets in trouble, and Lenny says he'll remember. While George and Lenny are talking, Curly's wife appears in the bunkhouse door. She is heavily made up and has hair hung in little rolled clusters. She claims to be looking for Curly and positions her figure to show it off. Lenny notices her body. George brusquely replies that Curly isn't here. She answers in a playful manner and leaves. Lenny admits that she is pretty. George vehemently tells Lenny not to even take a look at that bitch because she's nothing but jail bait. Lenny is shaken and says he doesn't like this place and wants to leave, but George insists they have to stay until they earn a steak. Slim, the ranch's jerkline skinner, arrives. He seems like a confident, understanding man who is respected by all the workers. After greeting George, Slim says his dog had pups. Another worker, Carlson, suggests that Slim tell Candy to shoot his old sheepdog because it's old and stinks like hell, too. Then Slim can give Candy one of the pups. The workers head to dinner, leaving George and Lenny alone in the bunkhouse. Lenny is excited about the pups, and George agrees to ask Slim if Lenny can have one. As they leave for dinner, George admits he hates Curly and might tangle with that bastard myself. In the bunkhouse, George thanks Slim for giving Lenny one of his pups. George then explains to Slim that a woman named Aunt Clara used to care for Lenny. After she died, George and Lenny began to work together. Eventually, a friendship developed. George then confesses that Lenny got in trouble at their previous job when he wanted to feel a dress that a girl was wearing. The girl panicked and claimed that Lenny tried to rape her. George and Lenny escaped when a lynch party came after Lenny. Slim seems understanding and says that Lenny ain't mean. Lenny comes in hiding a puppy under his coat. George orders him to return the puppy to the litter in the barn, and Lenny reluctantly obeys. Candy enters, accompanied by his old dog. Carlson soon follows, and again complains that the dog isn't useful and has a stink that hangs around even after he's gone. He tries to convince Candy to shoot it. When Candy says he can't, Carlson offers to shoot the dog himself. Slim agrees with Carlson, and Candy sadly gives in. Carlson gets his Luger pistol and leads the dog out of the bunkhouse. George, Slim, and the other men in the bunkhouse anxiously wait in silence until finally they hear the shot. Crooks, an African-American stable hand with a crooked back, informs Slim that Lenny is petting the pups in the barn. Slim says that Lenny isn't doing any harm and heads with Crooks to the barn to tar a mule's foot. Lenny enters and sits on his bunk. Curly bursts into the bunkhouse searching for his wife. He wonders where Slim is. When he's told that Slim is in the barn, Curly rushes out. Witt and Carlson follow him to watch a possible fight between Curly and Slim. George stays back in the bunkhouse, saying, "I don't want to get mixed up in nothing." With Lenny's prompting, George again describes their dream house and farm. Candy gets interested and asks if this farm is a real place. George says it is, and it costs $600. Candy asks if he might live there with George and Lenny and offers to chip in a partial payment of $350 along with whatever money George and Lenny can supply. George agrees. Suddenly, George and Lenny realize their dream could become a reality. Slim comes into the bunkhouse, followed by Curly, Carlson, and Witt. Curly is apologizing to Slim, saying he was just wondering where his wife was. Slim is angry because Curly suspected him of being with his wife. Carlson tells Curly to keep track of his wife and tell her to stop hanging around the bunkhouse. Curly turns on Carlson, but Carlson will have none of his threats. Then Curly notices Lenny, who is still smiling as he thinks about getting a farm with rabbits. Curly thinks Lenny is laughing at him, so he begins to punch Lenny in the face. Confused and horrified, Lenny backs against the wall and looks to George for help. George yells for Lenny to fight back. Lenny then seizes Curly's fist, and the next minute Curly was flopping like a fish on a line. George orders Lenny to let go, and he eventually does. Curly is in extreme pain, and his hand has been crushed. Slim orders the wagon to be hitched up to take Curly into town to the doctor. Lenny is worried that he did something wrong, but George assures him that he didn't. Crooks lives alone in a harness room in the barn. The room is filled with tools and with Crooks's personal possessions, including books. Crooks is a proud, aloof man with a lean face and a crooked spine. It is Saturday night, and most of the men are in town. Crooks is rubbing liniment on his back when Lenny quietly appears in the doorway. Crooks tries to chase him away, saying that Lenny has no right to be in this room. Lenny says he just wants to look at his puppy. Crooks softens somewhat and lets Lenny sit on a keg in the room. Crooks asks Lenny what he would do if George never came back from town. This idea scares Lenny, and he gets mad at Crooks for supposing George might get hurt. Crooks says he didn't mean to scare Lenny and claims he was talking about himself. Lenny settles down and reasserts that he and George are going to get a farm and raise rabbits. Crooks claims that most migrant workers have the dream of getting some land, but never do. Candy approaches the doorway and says he's looking for Lenny. Crooks invites him in. Candy says he's been figuring on how to get money by raising rabbits. Lenny becomes excited, but Crooks insists their dream won't happen. He has seen guys who were crazy for their own land, but every time a whorehouse or a blackjack game took what it takes. Candy argues that things will be different this time. He, George, and Lenny already have a lot of money saved in a bank. Crooks is surprised they have some money and asks if he might help out doing odd jobs at their farm. Curly's wife enters looking for Curly. Candy and Crooks try to get her to leave, but she wants to talk to people. Then she complains about her husband and wonders what happened to his hand. Candy says that Curly got his hand caught in a machine. She doesn't believe it. Then Curly's wife becomes indignant and complains about not having anything better to do on a Saturday night than talking to a bunch of bindle stiffs. Lenny seems fascinated by her, but Candy gets angry at Curly's wife, telling her that he and his friends are going to get a place of their own. She says they'll waste their money. Curly's wife then asks Lenny how he got the bruises on his face. Lenny doesn't know how to respond. He talks about tending rabbits. She flirts with Lenny, replying, "I might get a couple rabbits myself." Crooks angrily tells her she has no right being in a black man's room. She gets furious at Crooks, causing him to back down. Candy says he can hear the men coming back from town. Curly's wife tells Lenny that she's glad he broke her husband's hand. She then leaves. George comes in, wonders what Lenny is doing in Crooks's room, and scolds Candy for blabbing about their plan to get a farm. Crooks tells Candy to forget about his request to work for them on their future farm. Lenny, Candy, and George leave Crooks alone in the room. Alone in the barn, Lenny looks sadly at a dead puppy lying before him. Lenny has accidentally killed the puppy and fears George will find out and not let him tend rabbits. He covers the puppy with hay in an attempt to hide it. Then he unburies the animal and strokes it. "I didn't know you'd get killed so easy," he says. Curly's wife enters the barn. She wears heavy makeup and has styled her hair into little sausage curls. Curly's wife is startled when she sees the dead puppy. Lenny admits he accidentally killed the animal, and she tells him not to worry about it. but when she tries to talk to Lenny, he rebuffs her, saying, "If George sees me talking to you, he'll give me hell." Curly's wife gets angry because nobody wants to talk to her. She tells Lenny that she once had opportunities to join a traveling theater group and go to Hollywood. She doesn't like her husband because he ain't a nice fella. Lenny listens and then talks more about tending rabbits. Curly's wife asks Lenny why he's so nuts about looking after rabbits. After pondering the question, Lenny admits he likes to touch soft things. She says most people do. Then she places Lenny's hand on her hair and says, "Feel right around there and see how soft it is." Lenny strokes her hair and says that it feels nice. Curly's wife tells Lenny not to mess up her hair. When he keeps stroking it, she gets angry and jerks her head. Lenny panics and clutches her hair. As she struggles to get loose, Lenny places his hand over her mouth and begs her not to scream. She continues to struggle violently. Lenny pleads, "Please don't do none of that," as he is worried that George won't let him tend rabbits. When she tries to yell, Lenny gets angry and shakes her, breaking her neck. She is still, and Lenny realizes he has accidentally killed her. Lenny knows he's done a real bad thing and decides to run off and hide by the pool. Candy comes in, sees Curly's wife, and realizes she's dead. Stunned, he leaves and returns with George, who immediately knows that Lenny killed her. Candy claims that Curly will want to lynch Lenny. George thinks for a while and then agrees. Candy asks if their dream of getting a small farm has been destroyed, and George replies that it has. Afraid of being suspected as an accomplice in the killing, George leaves and Candy remains with the body. After a few minutes, Candy brings Curly, Slim, and other workers into the barn. George arrives last. When Curly realizes Lenny killed his wife, he becomes enraged and says, "I'll kill the big son of a bitch myself." He goes off with some of the men to organize a lynch mob, leaving Slim and George in the barn. Slim wonders if they could just lock him up and not kill him. George is doubtful of this and says that even if they lock him up and strap him down, that ain't no good, George. George agrees. Carlson comes back and claims his gun has been stolen. Curly hurries in and suspiciously asks George if he is coming with the lynch mob. George replies that he is. George, Curly, Slim, and the others leave the barn. Candy remains with Curly's dead wife. Lenny arrives at the tranquil pool, drinks water from it, and sits and waits for George. He imagines Aunt Clara scolding him about doing bad things and not appreciating what George does for him. Lenny cries that he tries to do what is right. Then Lenny awakens a huge rabbit, which claims that Lenny cannot take good care of rabbits. The rabbit says that George is going to get sick of Lenny and leave him. Lenny cries out that George would never do this and repeats George's name. George silently appears and asks what Lenny is yelling about. When Lenny asks if George is going to leave him, George says no, reassuring Lenny. Lenny is surprised that George is not scolding him. George repeats the words he usually says when he scolds Lenny, but without any feeling behind them. Lenny asks George to tell him how they are different from other guys. George says they're different because they have each other. Lenny cries triumphantly, "We got each other, that's what!" George tells Lenny to take off his hat and look across the river. Lenny obeys. George removes Carlson's Luger from his side pocket. He looks at the back of Lenny's head and begins to describe how great their life will be on their small farm. He hears the lynch mob approaching, and when Lenny asks him to go on with his description, George says, "Everybody gonna be nice to you. Ain't gonna be no more trouble." The voices of the mob are close. George points the gun at the back of Lenny's head. George's hand shakes violently, but he manages to fire, and Lenny jars and slumps forward on the sand. Curly, Carlson, Slim, and other members of the mob burst onto the scene and see that George has shot and killed Lenny. Carlson assumes George took the gun away from Lenny and shot him. George agrees. Slim tries to console George, saying, "You hadda, George. I swear you hadda." Slim and George head up a trail toward the highway. Curly and Carlson look after them. Carlson says, "Now what the hell you suppose is eating them two guys?"